Let's bring in our legal think tank to see what they have to say about that. Joining us in Tampa, Florida, criminal defense attorney Teresa Jean-Pierre Coy is with us. In the Bronx, New York, criminal defense attorney Renee Hill, and in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Michael Bixon. Great to see everyone. Now, before you give your opinion on, and I want to focus on this third degree and whether or not it fits into the factual scenario here, take a listen to what Eric Nelson, the attorney for Derek Chauvin, said today in court in making some arguments.
Under Knorr, if you look at the facts of Knorr, it's a Minneapolis police officer. This is a case involving a former Minneapolis police officer. And that's about where the similarities end. And if you look at the line of cases, Knorr, Middich, Hall, all three of those cases, there's some sort of an instrumentality that is used, a gun or a car, generally speaking. Those items could be viewed as inherently dangerous. So in Knorr, right, they're saying what I understand Knorr to stand for is the single person rule, and whether a single person can be the focus of the third degree murder. But in the Knorr case, Mr. Knorr shot his gun across his partner's chest towards a silhouette that could have been anyone or anything. They just saw this biker. Anybody within the line of travel of that bullet was put at risk. It happened to be a single person that was there. And I think that that's significantly different factually from what is alleged in this particular case. They are alleging that my client did not do something inherently dangerous. It was focused on a single person. So factually, these cases are considerably different.
All right, and I don't want to focus on the single person or a bunch of people. To me, it's this element of this imminently dangerous act. And I think it's borderline intellectually dishonest to make that argument for this factual scenario. I think the alleged facts here fit second-degree murder, they fit potentially manslaughter, but is subduing a suspect in a manner that we've seen in the training book, that he was trained by the Minneapolis police, really what we think of when we think of imminently dangerous and depraved indifference? Teresa, because I go back to law school, depraved indifference. It's always you're doing something that we all know is dangerous. You're firing a gun into the darkness. You're at the top of the Empire State Building and you decide you're going to drop a brick. Like you know that's dangerous and someone get it. You drive a car through a crowd of people. You know that's imminently dangerous. But is exercising something that you're trained to do to subdue a suspect, can we really call that imminently dangerous?
I think the argument can be made. I think taking your knee and leaving it on a person's neck for an extended period of time, that you can make that stretch and you can make that argument. So I think you can make the argument, and I think it fits.
Renee, which team are you on? You're on Team Vinny or Team Teresa here tonight? And again, I'm saying second degree fits. I think negligence, the culpable negligence fits as well. This one, though, what I learned in law school would not be this situation.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely cuts against the grain of what we learned in law school. And I understand where Teresa is coming from, but I'm having a hard time accepting this third-degree murder charge being in here. I don't like it being here. I think it's going to cause problems. I think it gives the jury too much of an opportunity to compromise in this case. I think it's going to present a problem. But I agree with you, Vinny. You know, this is not the depraved indifference type of case that we're used to, that we are accustomed to seeing. But I do understand how it can be a stretch to get it to that point. I understand that.
And Michael, the way I look at the alleged facts here, and I understand the arguments, and I think the jury could be convinced that he was intentionally trying to harm George Floyd, assault him, and he died as a result. That is felony murder. That is second degree. I could also see perhaps they believe that he's trying to subdue him, but he does it improperly. He does it negligently, and he causes the death. But I don't see what I've always thought depraved indifference was, what imminent danger was.
Well, I think, Vinny, it's really a factual dispute. I mean, you're arguing, what's depraved. And I think when you look at the scenario, I certainly heard the defense argue about the instrumentality. There wasn't a car, there wasn't a gun involved. But I really think that this really goes more in line with what the judge was talking about this issue with the others, whether or not it could be directed just at George Floyd or whether it had to be directed at others. And I think that's really where the argument was. I mean, for me, it wasn't about whether or not, he was choking him or whether he was shooting him and that making the difference in this argument. I think it was really about whether or not this was directed at George Floyd and under the statute, whether or not that was allowed. When I read the statute, it really appears as though it had to be directed at others, not whether or not he was shooting a gun or driving a car. I absolutely think that choking someone for that long would fit the requirements. It's just a question of whether or not it had to be directed at others or just at George Floyd.
Teresa.
Was that Team Teresa?
Yeah, but Teresa, let me ask you, and I'm not sure where Michael is on this, right? I don't know, because he's a tie-breaking vote right now. But looking at are we arguing? Will prosecutors have to argue that police were training him in a manner to do something that was imminently dangerous? Is that what we're saying here, or are we saying the imminent danger isn't until he's there in the 5th minute, or the 4th minute, or the 3rd minute? Like, then it's not. Then to me, it's not imminent. To me, imminent is what you're doing is like immediately dangerous. I'm driving through a crowd. I'm dropping that brick off the building. I'm firing a gun into an area and I don't know who's there. To me, that's imminent. The 9 minutes in and of itself, to me, almost takes away that element.
I think again, I see what you're saying, but I think that
I'm going to convince you.
Have to argue. I don't know if you're going to do it. We'll see by the end of the night. But I think they are going to have to argue that the minutes is what makes it imminent. And I understand in our regular thinking, imminent is instantaneous, quickly. But I think in this case, it's going to be factual, and they're going to have to argue that it was the length of time, and that in and of itself can also be, deemed imminent. So I'm still Team Teresa.
Okay, all right, she's still there, and that's fine. I mean, one thing about this show, folks, and I don't know what they do on other programs, but I never tell anyone what to say. I never tell anyone what to believe. We have honest opinions and interpretation of the law. That's what the show's all about. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the jury, because we are in jury selection. We seated another one today, and when I say we, I mean the judge and the lawyers in the courtroom. But we're going to hear who this juror is and break down what's happening with the 6 who were there. We're halfway to getting to 12. 14 will be the ultimate number. That's coming up next.
There was a question on the questionnaire regarding some general impressions you may have formed of George Floyd. And you stated that your general impression was neutral, but you added that if he had complied with officers' orders, this wouldn't have happened. Do you recall making that statement?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what your thought process is there in making that statement?
I mean, it's just obvious if he wouldn't just complied, then that wouldn't happen. Maybe he just wouldn't been arrested and put in a cop car, and that's about it.
That was juror 36, who becomes number 6 to make it onto the jury. So despite what he said there, prosecutors were fine with juror 36. Let's take a look on the screen. We can find out a little bit more about this juror, the 6th one to be seated, the only one who made it through today, has been accepted. Take a look. Is a male, Hispanic, in his 30s. Like all these jurors are like 30-something, right? Almost all of them. Some maybe late 20s, some maybe early 40s, but really right in that range. A young jury. He's a route driver. Has seen the video of George Floyd's death, and as you heard, felt if George Floyd complied, this wouldn't have happened. And here's another great factoid. Likes crime shows and true crime podcasts. Let's bring back in our think tank, Renee Hill. Surprised at all that prosecutors were okay with juror 36?
Slightly. but you're not going to have a perfect juror. You're never going to have a perfect juror. So you have to really parse out what's here and decide what you can accept and then move on to the next. And I'm surprised that they have 6 sworn jurors already in just 2 days. They are moving very quickly. I know they've had the juror questionnaires to go over, and these were sent out to the jurors, months ago. So they've had time to really look these over and decide who they think they want to keep. But, the statement that he feels that had he complied, this wouldn't have happened. I don't know. It's so difficult. But overall, I don't know what else they've had to look at. So.
Well, that's what I'm going to do right now, Renee. I'm going to play another part of what Juror 36 said because, like all these other jurors, they say one thing and you're like, oh, there's no way they're going to keep him. But then they say something else. You're like, the other side, they're not going to keep him. And then they keep him. Yeah. Take a listen to more of Juror 36.
You agree that you have formed an opinion about the case, right?
If he would say it, then yeah, that's what it is.
So, because the next question kind of asks you about your opinions. The question was, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant, Mr. Chauvin? And it gave you some options: negative, very negative, neutral, somewhat positive, or very positive.
Yeah.
Like a kind of a spectrum of options. And you checked very negative. Right? So you have formed here already a very negative impression of Mr. Chauvin based upon what you saw in that video. You would agree?
Yes.
And it's perfectly fine for you for that to be your opinion. Right? I'm not challenging that.
Yeah.
And the questioner asks you to explain, and you say, there was no reason for Chauvin to kneel on his neck for that long, and him just being stubborn, not wanting to let go, gave me the impression of him just showing off his authority, right?
Yes.
So, again, you're acknowledging, and it's okay. I'm really not trying to, say that you can't have an opinion.
Okay.
I need you to acknowledge that you have formed some thoughts about this case.
Okay.
And that those thoughts really go to the ultimate question that a jury has to decide. Is Mr. Chauvin guilty or not guilty, right?
Okay.
And so if I were to ask you right now what your verdict would be right now, guilty or not guilty, what would it be?
Objection, Your Honor.
All right, Michael Bixon, are you surprised that the defense didn't bounce this juror?
Like we heard before, it's almost impossible to find the perfect juror that, you are absolutely committed to, that there is almost no problems. And with the amount of, the questions in this long questionnaire that everybody had, I think you're going to get a lot more out of these jurors than you normally would in almost any trial. So I think that you're going to get both good and bad out of a lot of these jurors. I am a little surprised because that is a very sort of big drawback for the defense to roll with. But if they feel like they can rehabilitate him, they feel like he can be objective about the facts and law, then I say go for it.
All right. Now, another interesting pattern has developed here, Teresa. Take a look at the screen here. And I'm talking about potential female jurors. And if you take a look at what's happening right now with this jury, we have 6 total jurors already, but just 1 is a woman. We've had 3 women excused for cause. The defense struck 1 woman. The prosecution has struck 2. So the women just aren't making their way onto this jury. Teresa, does that, when you thought about this case, did you ever think about it in terms of the way men versus women see it and maybe have reacted to the video and everything else?
No, I've never actually thought about that gender-wise. So, at this point, we still have 6 more jurors to go and some alternates. So who knows what will happen? Maybe they'll pick 6 more women. I don't know. But I've never really thought about it in terms of how a woman or a man would react to it. I think that, what we've seen in this video is universal. And, just kind of have to roll with that. But no, I've never thought about it in terms of gender.
Yeah, and I didn't either until I saw this pattern, and I was wondering, wait, did I miss something here? Is there a difference? So let's take a listen to one of the jurors who's not been seated, Juror 37, who is talking about that video during voir dire.
Are you willing or are you able to set what you know about this case now aside and judge this case based upon the evidence in court?
Like I mentioned before, there's video surveillance, so I can't unsee the video, so I'm not able to set that part aside.
What if I were to tell you that there's a fairly high probability that that video that you've already seen is going to be evidence in this case? So you're going to see it again.
It's still going to be traumatizing to me.
Okay. You wrote that you cried hearing him call for his mother during his last minutes of life.
Yes.
So that you had a very strong emotional response to that.
Yes.
All right, Teresa, after hearing from Juror 37, who did not get seated, got dismissed in this case, and thinking about that dynamic and the way people are seeing that video, I guess that's the biggest hurdle here for jury selection, is making sure that each juror that is seated, because all of them except one have seen the video, and we know the impact the video has had, that they have to be able to put whatever reaction they have to that about what should happen because of that video, they have to put that aside. That is difficult.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, it's an extremely difficult thing to do, and but we time and time again we call jurors in, and that's exactly what we ask them to do. And our hope is that we pick the right ones, right? I mean, we're only stuck with what they tell us, but truly we don't really know the inside. So it's an extremely difficult position to be in, and I commend anybody who makes it onto this jury, or any jury for that matter, because it's very tough.
Yeah, and again, I'll tell you, they've been very, very honest. And the one woman who has made it on is my favorite juror right now, Renee, for two reasons. First reason, when she found out she was on the jury, she said, awesome, right? Great enthusiasm.
Those
Number
are the
two,
ones that you got to be scared of.
and she's a type 1 diabetic like I am. So, we are connected that way. We only have a few seconds here, Renee, but how about that, that you've got one woman, but she's very, very out there. She's very full of energy and full of passion for all
She's
this.
enthusiastic, and those are the ones, awesome was her response. Those are the ones that you have to be afraid of in certain times, but she may be one of those jurors in the room that kind of takes control of the jury room when they go in for deliberations. So the attorneys are going to want to pay attention to her reactions to her, in the courtroom when they're cross-examining and examining the witnesses in this case.
Absolutely. A lot of people think she may end up being the foreperson, at least so far. All right, when we come back, we're going to take you on the docket and take a look at another case that we're tracking here, the Snake King murder trial. It's a guy, he's a world-famous snake breeder. He's shot and killed, and now his wife is the one facing murder charges. We've got a preview next. All right, today in the death of George Floyd murder trial, the prosecution and Chauvin defense team agreed on a 6th juror to be seated in the case. And this is huge news. The 3rd-degree murder charge has been reinstated in the trial of the former Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin. Court TV cameras inside that courtroom all day. They'll be there tomorrow. We'll be live for jury selection when it continues in the morning. But right now, we're going to take you on the docket, and this is the Snake King murder trial. This is the story of a young man, Ben Rennick. He was married to a woman named Lynn Lee. His job, his profession was raising and breeding snakes, and he made money doing it. He was at the top of his field, but he was shot and killed. And now his wife has been charged with his murder. Ted Rowlands has the story.
Ben Rennick was one of the country's preeminent snake breeders.
This girl, very tame.
Rennick appeared at reptile shows selling his snakes to enthusiasts all over the country. That ended in June of 2017 when he was found dead at his breeding facility.
I thought he'd been attacked by a snake because his skull was crushed. But he was standing exactly where he always stood, right there in the facility.
Sam Rennick is Ben's brother. He got the panicked call that night from Ben's wife, Lynn Lee.
It wasn't until well after the police arrived and that I was told that he was actually murdered by a gun, by a weapon, and I found that very hard to believe. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Nobody would ever want to hurt Ben.
According to police, Ben was the victim of multiple gunshot wounds, with one being a contact wound to the head. Nothing was stolen, and based on where his body was found, investigators seemed to be convinced of one thing, that the killer was known to Rennick. But Ben's murder went unsolved for more than 2 years, until a break. Identified only as BB in the police report, he broke the case wide open with information leading to the arrest of Ben's wife, Lynn Lee Rennick, and her ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. The two are charged with first-degree murder in the death of Ben Rennick. According to the probable cause affidavit, BB told police he was having an affair with Lynn Lee while she was married to Ben. They continued to see each other after Ben died, even fathering a child with her. According to BB, Lynn Lee told him she feared Ben would divorce her over the money problems with the spa. So, with the help of ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, she planned to shoot Ben after a previous poisoning attempt failed to kill him. BB told police that Lynn Lee and Humphrey went to the snake farm. Lynn Lee told Ben that Humphrey was an old friend who wanted to see the snakes. After a tour, they returned to the car to retrieve a gun. BB told police Lynn Lee walked in with the gun and shot Ben multiple times. Lynn Lee and Humphrey then returned to Lynn Lee's spa business, where Lynn Lee took off her clothes and took a shower, giving the clothes to Humphrey to dispose of with the gun and shell casings.
It was a huge relief. We were happy to finally get some answers. However, of course, they were ugly. Hearing that she attempted to poison him, all of that was new news to us. Finding out that she was having an affair was something we were completely taken. We were shocked. We couldn't have imagined that. That's not the Lynn Lee we knew.
Unbelievable story. You're talking about sex, money, and snakes. But I'll tell you one thing that may not be a part of this trial: forensic evidence. The defense has spoken, and we spoke with an investigative reporter in the last hour, and was talking about the fact that the defense says there's really no forensics tying Lynn Lee to this murder. Let's bring back in our think tank Michael Bixon. Let me start with you. It seems prosecutors will have a story to tell to this jury. Lynn Lee and these three men, her husband, her way former boyfriend, and the man in the middle, this BB character, who I think is going to be the most important person in this trial. So how do you think Lynn Lee and her defense team will approach BB and his testimony? Do you think they just attack his credibility, or do they take it a step further and perhaps point the finger at him?
I think both are possible. And I think the biggest sort of plus for the defense at this point is that BB, whoever this is, at some point already talked to the police back when this murder first happened, and he told them that he didn't know anything. So now we have him changing his story. So not only do we have a total lack of forensics in this case, but we also have a star witness who's already changed his story once. And I think that's a huge bonus for the defense.
Yeah, Teresa, when I think of this trial and the way it plays out, it's almost like a soap opera, because you've got Lynn Lee, she's got a husband, he's making a lot of money, but then she's got this old boyfriend who I don't know what the contact is there, but then according to BB, they're fooling around and she ends up having a baby with BB.
It makes for some, juicy commentary. But, I agree with Michael that, with this particular case, I'm basically going to throw BB under the bus all day long. And if I'm not mistaken, I think she also had a restraining order against him at one time. So at this point, my argument's going to be that, hey, he's coming here, he's lying, he's a jilted lover. So there's a lot you can do with this. And the most crucial thing, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, there's no forensic evidence. So, I mean, it's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure.
Yeah, Renee Hill, we got bad blood between BB and Lynn Lee. Do you think this gets... Where do you think the attention of the jury goes in a case like this? And I know they follow the judge's instructions, but when you've got all these stories and the money, and she's trying to run this business, and allegations that perhaps Ben is trying to get enough money so he can get away from Lynn Lee and you know, just cut her off. And I'm afraid here that the jury gets lost in the story, and that, I think, is advantage defense.
Yeah, it's definitely an advantage for the defense, and I agree with Michael and Teresa. You know, there's fuel here for the defense to use against Bibi and throw everything at him for all of the things that have already been stated. You know, and again, a jilted lover, the inconsistent statements, changing his story all around, no forensics, which is going to be huge. And this happened a couple of years ago. Memories fade. All of these things are in favor of the defense. So it's going to certainly be an uphill battle for the prosecution in this case. Their main witness is going to look very shady, and I think that the jurors are going to be looking at that. They're going to be involved in the case because it is juicy. The facts of the case, all of these different things that they have to look at. But when it comes down to proof beyond a reasonable doubt as to whether or not she did this without forensics and with the shakiness of their main witness, I think it's a huge problem for the prosecution.
All right, so we're going to continue to track this one. We've got a criminal setting that is scheduled for June 14th, and perhaps during that criminal setting, we will get a trial date. The Snake King murder trial, Missouri versus Lynn Lee Rennick. We'll continue to follow it right here on your front row seat to justice. When we come back, time to hear from you, the 13th juror. And I had a question today about the jury and the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin, who's accused of murdering George Floyd. We have no idea what this jury is going to ultimately say in this case. As a matter of fact, we don't know who the ultimate jury is yet, but their verdict, very unpredictable. But my question to you tonight, will you trust the jury's verdict? Your answer, your verdict about their verdict next.
You agree that you have formed an opinion about the case, right?
If you would say it, then yeah, that's what it is.
So, because the next question kind of asks you about your opinions. The question was, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant, Mr. Chauvin? And it gave you some options: negative, very negative, neutral, somewhat positive, or very positive. It was like a kind of a spectrum of options. And you checked very negative. Right? So you have formed here already a very negative impression of Mr. Chauvin based upon what you saw in that video. You would agree?
Yes.
And it's perfectly fine for you for that to be your opinion. Right? I'm not challenging that.
Yeah.
And the questioner asks you to explain, and you say there was no reason for Chauvin to kneel on his neck for that long, and him just being stubborn, not wanting to let go, gave me the impression of him just showing off his authority, right?
Yes.
So again, you're acknowledging, and it's okay. I'm really not trying to, say that you can't have an opinion.
Okay.
I need you to acknowledge that you have formed some thoughts about this case.
Okay.
And that those thoughts really go to the ultimate question that a jury has to decide. Is Mr. Chauvin guilty or not guilty, right?
Okay.
And so if I were to ask you right now what your verdict would be right now, guilty or not guilty, what would it be?
Objection, Your Honor.
All right, juror 36 was not permitted to answer that question during the jury selection voir dire process, but ultimately will have to answer that question because he made it onto the jury. So the jury's going to come to a verdict, unless they don't, right? You know, if they can't all agree. But I tend to think that juries get to that verdict most of the time. So when that verdict comes down, and I asked you this today as our 13th juror question, will you trust and accept the jury's verdict? I mean, you're hearing from these jurors all day long during the process here on Court TV with our cameras inside the courtroom, but will you trust and accept the jury's verdict? We begin with our 13th juror comment of the day, coming from Tony, who says, that depends on what the judge allows the jury to see. A judge can orchestrate a jury and herd them towards a certain verdict. Teresa, Jean-Pierre Coy, how much influence do judges have, do you think, in getting a jury to a verdict?
I think they have some influence. I mean, I think there are certain, and I'll have to admit, I've been in trials where I felt like judges, you know, by the way they treat one counsel from the other, or the way their tone or their inflections can sometimes communicate to juries. So I tend to agree that sometimes judges can influence juries' verdicts. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it does happen, and they do have a big role in that.
Love the transparency here, folks. You got to love it. Carolyn tonight. We really have no choice but to accept the verdict, and we'll have to deal with the consequences whichever way it goes. Renee Hill, do you think there will be consequences after the verdict in this case, one way or the other?
Well, if he is found not guilty, I certainly believe there will be consequences. There will be protests. There will be a lot of things that will happen because people will be discouraged once again if the verdict is not what they believe it should be. And so there certainly will be consequences. And I think if there is a guilty verdict, I think there may be consequences with that as well, because, you know, there could be protesters on both sides. But I think more so if there is a not guilty verdict, there will be consequences that Minneapolis is going to see, and all over the country for that matter, because it has
I agree with you there.
So many things all over the country. Yeah.
As well as Minneapolis has prepared for all of this, I think the rest of the country has to, you know, keep an eye open as well. Because
Absolutely.
That's what happens at the end of the trial. There's a verdict, and we never know what it is. Diane tonight, once all the evidence has been presented, I have faith the jury will look at it all and follow the law in their decision. I may or may not like their decision, but I will accept it. That is why we have this trial and jury process. Michael Bixon, sometimes my guests here are a little more skeptical about jurors following the law and the facts. Where do you fall in there? I trust them. How about you?
I think in most instances I do. When you have a high-profile case, though, things change because you're so inundated with, you know, the media and the news and watching videos and people's perspectives before you even step into that courtroom. So you might get a little bit more biased. I think this might be one of those cases, and I think that while I might respect the decision, how they got there might be a different story.
Interesting. Bill tonight. Some people will not accept the facts of this case. Many minds are made up before the first day of testifying. Teresa, I think the voir dire process here has been very revealing because there have been people that have come in there and have been brutally honest, which is what you want. I mean, thoughtful, but really letting the judge and the lawyers know their feelings, that it can't be a comfortable situation for an ordinary citizen to come into a courtroom under very unusual and high-profile circumstances and be truthful and speak. But I think the process is going well here, and I think we're doing, and I keep saying we, I mean the judge and the lawyers are doing a great job of really filtering through and getting to the truth that's inside the hearts and minds of these jurors right now.
I think they are doing a great job. But as I said before, at the end of the day, the most that we can do is ask the questions and get the answers. But truly, what these jurors feel on the inside, I really don't know. I'm skeptical.
Another skeptical guest that I have. All my guests are so skeptical.
When you've done this long enough, you know, you kind of sometimes become skeptical. So, but I truly believe that what they feel on the inside, we don't know. I hope and pray that what they are saying is truly how they feel, and that's how they'll, that they'll put all those feelings aside and come up with the true and just verdict. And I do feel for the most part jurors do that. But like Mike said, sometimes with these high-profile cases,
that's
things
what
are
happens.
a little different.
Teresa Jean-Pierre Coy, Renee Hill, Michael Bixon, thank you so much for your insight and honesty tonight. We appreciate it. All right, folks, join us tomorrow morning. Gavel to gavel coverage. I'm Vinny Politan. Have a great night. Don't forget to hug the kids.